What is the creepiest glitch in the Matrix you've experienced?
10 years ago I was returning home from a road trip with two friends. I received a phone call from my parents asking when we would be arriving, and I explained that we were about 25 minutes away. About a minute later we came around a bend. It was a full moon and we could see the reflection from a lake below us, and other than that the road was completely empty. Suddenly everything went completely dark in the car. No lights from the dash or gauges or headlights on the road. The music also stopped, and restarted at the beginning of the CD we were listening to. There was now a vehicle pulled over by the police about 1/4 mile in front of us that hadn't been there a split second before. I assumed I had dozed off for just a second as it was late. I thought it was still quite peculiar, though. After about a minute, the driver of the car tuned the music all the way down and said, "Did that just happen to anyone else?" The other passenger in the back seat sat forward abruptly and exclaimed, "I thought I just fell asleep." We then realized that the clock in the car was reading an hour later than it just had a minute before. To keep ourselves from freaking out, we decided that the car had possibly had a momentary electrical failure and reset the clock to an odd time, turned off the dash lights, headlights, and gauges, and restarted the CD player. But when we arrived home 25 minutes later, we were 1 hour late. I am missing an hour of my life, and to this day have no idea how it happened. I swear to all the gods that a similar glitch in time happened to me. However, in my case, I was walking into the hallway from my bedroom, and as I got about 6 feet down the hallway, I was seamlessly transported back to the hallway entrance. This was no déjà vu event, at least not like I've ever had before or since. I distinctly remember physically walking into my hallway when I suddenly start from the entrance again. I nearly threw up and shit myself at that very moment. It literally made me sick and scared. I also remember what happened about a second or so before this teleportation glitch. My body started to softly vibrate as if I were some rusty-ass robot. If you can imagine the low-powered vibration of console controllers, but your entire body doing it, that's what it felt like. It lasted for about 2 seconds, right until I teleported. It was somewhat painful to move in that state. I never mentioned it to anyone because, well, obvious reasons. I had a friend who used to have absence seizures. Medication would prevent him from having them for the most part, but occasionally weird things would happen. One time we both got to work and we got out of the car and walked the entire length of the parking lot and into the building, at which point he gave me a really confused look and asked me how we managed to seemingly teleport from the car into the building. Basically, he started the action of walking towards the building and then began having a seizure which didn't stop until we had entered the building. His body just automated the process of walking and he had no memory of it. He was really confused. When I was a teenager I had 2 really intense dreams one night. The first one was about an online friend of mine calling me to say she'd broken up with her boyfriend, and I sang a few lines of Seal's "Don't Cry" to her over the phone. The second dream was finding a real-life friend dead body floating in her bathtub. I didn't think anything of it up until I logged online that evening and the online friend came online to tell me her boyfriend broke up with her. I immediately asked if I could call her, and she said number. I remember thinking that it meant something, like I could change it. Not long after, my phone rang, and it was real-life friend from the dream calling me. I was completely freaked at this point, but talked to her normally. She was just talking about school and shit. Up until I realized I heard a splash in the background. I asked her, "Are you in the tub?" And when she said yes I felt like my heart had stopped. I asked her, "What did you do?" She didn't answer me right away, and then after a very long pause she told me she'd taken an entire bottle of pills and chased it with mushrooms and vodka. She'd gotten scared waiting for it to hit her. So she called me so she'd hear someone's voice. I hung up and called 911. By the time they got there she was unconscious, but alive. Today she's a mom to a beautiful little girl, and she's okay. Edit. Whoa, thank you for the gold. It seems like one of many who've had an experience like that before. Suicide is a horrific thing, and my deepest sympathies for anyone who has been touched by it. Oh, I have a story. One time my wife and I were coming back from a dinner night out. When I opened the door of the house, she was sitting at the computer working, as I usually find her when I get home. Nothing unusual, except she was entering the house with me. I shrugged it off and carried on. We went to bed and I told her that I saw her sitting at the computer, and she goes dead serious and told me that when I opened the door, she saw herself sitting at the computer working. Creepiest thing I've ever experienced. The fact that our neighbor's 2-years-old daughter used to point to the TV when it was off and tell us that the person on the screen was making scary faces and that she wanted it to go away, didn't help us getting much sleep that night. Not creepy, but so vivid and distinct that I still think about it. Years later, I had a, subjectively, long, involved dream where I was a vendor in a fish market. I remember getting up early, dressing, doing a whole morning routine, going to get tea, heading out to the docks, buying fish, loading them in a cart and going to get ice, then haggling for ice, buying some less fresh fish while I was at it, then going to a market to my stall, setting up and selling fish all day. It was so real. I talked to friends, smoked nasty cigarettes, haggled customers, ate lunch, had tea and just lived through the day. At the end of the day, I cleaned up, counted my cash, paid the stall rent, went home, cooked some of the fish I hadn't sold, sling with some veggies and rice that I'd traded for. I drank more tea, relaxed for a while, then drew a hot bath, soaked and smoked some more cigs, then went to bed. The next morning, I woke up refreshed, ready to go down to the docks to buy fresh catch, except I was in my house, next to my wife, truck parked outside and it was Saturday, no work. My wife and I were getting geared up to go skiing in Oregon and the car was already packed. Weird thing was, in the dream, I was single and a smoker. I'm not. And the whole long dream had been in fluent Chinese. The effortless kind of fluency that only comes from a lifetime of speaking it. Oh, and I had been Chinese. I'm a big, hairy white dude, somewhat fluent in Spanish and I know a little bit of Russian, but I've never. It was just weird. I've never worked in a fish market. I wonder who I was. I wonder what that was. There was a man on the side of the road sort of limping along and I pulled over and asked if he was okay. No, drive away while you still can. I offered him a ride. Don't do it. He's a ghost. He's definitely a ghost. He didn't talk much. He was tired. Here ... we ... go. Right here, he said, pointing. After the white truck. Here? I pulled into the driveway. Yes. Shut up, I said. What? He asked. He was grinning, like he knew what I was going to say next. Ogadahidahid. He thanked me for the ride and got out of my car and walked through the front door of my old apartment. Well then, I was heading home with my dad. We stopped at a drive-through. I start feeling more and more anxious for no reason, to the point where it makes lightheaded and sick to my stomach. We have to wait a little bit ahead, because they gave us the order wrong. So I sit there, feeling like shit, and it suddenly comes to me an urge to call my brother. He was trying to call us. He was in a car accident. No one died, some got seriously bruised, He was only shaken. I told him to shut up and get as far away from the car as possible. He didn't understand but followed through, trying to call some of his buddies, and I could hear them calling him a wuss, him giving up and getting far, and then a loud noise, people shouting. After the whole shit was over, he told me what happened. His drunk friend tried to impress some girls in the car, hit the gas, drifted and hit the bottom of the car on some rocks, completely fucking with the engine. They stood near the car, the driver still inside trying to turn the engine back on. The hood burst in flames and the car started to burn fast. The driver managed to get away, but got severely hurt. Some of the guys and girls who stood around were hurt and burned too, but not as bad as the driver. My brother was the only one with light bruises from the whole thing. He told me that when I ordered him to get away from the car, he was in front of it, inches from the hood. I never experienced anything like this before and after, just this once. It's just a fucking weird memory. I don't remember what I was thinking. I remember it like watching a movie and seeing myself and everything from an outside angle. Have a few, but this one stands out. I was catching a Skytrain in one particular city about 15 minutes from where I get off. While I wait, there is a woman with glazed eyes asking people for money. She came up to me, stopped briefly, and asked, "Excuse me, could you spare some money? My brother is in the hospital and I'd like some money to buy him some flowers." That's rich, I thought. Drug addicts are getting more and more obvious with their lines. "Here's $5. Gave it to her without even looking her in the face, convinced of her intentions. Anyways, my train pulls up and I get on. I look through the glass at her walking around asking others for money as the train pulls away. The train arrives at the station 15 minutes later, and I walk down and out to the bus stop. There is only one bus the direction I'm going, and just my luck, it is there waiting when I get off the train. So on the bus I hop and wait for the bus driver to finish reading his paper before the doors close and we embark down the highway. About 5–10 minutes traveling, the driver pulls over for a routine stop. The doors open, and to my complete astonishment the woman from the Skytrain walks into the bus, a dozen roses in hand. She looks me right in the eyes as she walks past to take her seat. How in the blue hell did she get there? I took the train before her. I watched her at the train stop from inside as we pulled away. I went over a river. I caught the first and only bus going this particular direction, and not only did she beat me there, she had time to go to a store and buy a dozen roses. To this day I have no idea how this happened. I once worked in a video store in a very middle-class family-friendly neighborhood. We'd have to play kids' movies during the day to promote them. On this day, we were playing B-movie, and just at the bit where the main bee got discovered in the house by humans, an enormous bumblebee flew into the store and started buzzing around the Chip-a-Chop display on the counter. My workmate freaked out and was screeching for me to kill it, just like the dude on the TV. I love insects, so I ran up and got a glass and trapped it at the exact time the main chick trapped the main bee in the film. When I got back from letting it out, I just gave my workmate a knowing look at let the main chick give the lecture about not killing small creatures for me. I hope my boring coincidence is a better option for you. It happened in early 2000 when I was working at a juvenile detention center in a small town in Oklahoma as a corrections officer. I was working nights at the time and went to work at 9 p.m. This one night when I arrived for work, my supervisor looked confused and asked me what I was doing there. I said I work tonight, and he said, "But they said you called in a few hours ago saying that you were sick." I was a bit confused and said it must have been someone else and they got the message wrong. After everyone else showed up for work that night, it was a bit more weird, but we carried on as usual and assigned everyone their places for the night. I went to work in the control room where I usually work. The control room is the center of the prison that has direct control over the cameras, doors, phones and everything. After I relieved the guard on duty and settled in for the night, I looked at the message that said I called in. It said that I had called at 6:50 and said that I had gotten sick while out cleaning up after the storm. There had been a storm the night before and it was a bit bad, but not anything that I had to go out to clean up. It was truly weird. The supervisor came into the control about that time. He was also a friend of mine outside work and we started talking about it, and how odd it was. I decided to call my wife at home and tell her about it while he was still sitting there. I picked up the phone and dialed. After 2 rings a man picked up the phone and with a raspy voice said hello. I did not know what to say for a few seconds. I looked at the phone to make sure I dialed the right number, and I had. After a few seconds the person said hello, again in the same raspy voice. I said hello. Who is this? This is Taylor. Who is this? The person said. My head started spinning because my name is Taylor also. I said in almost a scream, where is Ann? He said Ann's in bed. Who is this? I dropped the phone and told my supervisor to ring me out. I had to get home, and I took off towards the door. I could hear Dave pick up the phone behind me and say hello, followed soon after by what the fuck, rather loudly. I ran to my car and drove home faster than what was legal, my mind racing the entire time. I busted through the door and my wife was sitting watching TV and was shocked at me being home. I asked her who was there and she said no one has been here. After a rather long talk with my wife, I went to call the prison to tell them what was going on, but the phone was dead. I went back to work and when I came in Dave was acting weird and asked me how the hell are you doing this? He told me that when I left, he picked up the phone and the person on the other end sounded like me. He kinda freaked out and hung up the phone. A minute later, as he could see my car leaving the parking lot, I had called back from home and asked what the fuck was going on. He said that I was a bit irate and said I was sick and did not feel like playing these games and was telling him to stop prank calling me and hung up. After convincing him I had no idea what was going on, we went back to work. Later, I find out that the phone line for my area had been knocked down the night before by the storm. This is absolutely the strangest thing that has ever happened to me. I had a terrifying dream once where sound and sight lingered after. I used to attend a university that had subterranean tunnels, redundant, connecting all the buildings. The dream I had was set there, and is, to this day, the clearest dream I've ever had. I was on campus, and it was a perfect day. One of those perfect days that you can't believe exist. Mild weather, good for a t-shirt or long sleeves. A few white clouds, no wind. There was a lot of people in the main quad. I swear I remember waking up and after stopping my anxiety attack, laughing at how cliché the weather was in my brain. All of a sudden, a weird hush falls over the quad, as if we all know something bad is about to happen. Everyone stops, and then the air raid sirens begin. They're quiet at first, as if a few miles away, then they start getting louder, closer, and faster with each passing minute. Everyone is of course panicking. I remember running into the tunnels. We heard a loud rushing sound, and did the duck and cover pose. I looked down the long tunnel and all of a sudden a bright white light flashed, and I woke up. The air raid sirens seemed to echo for a good 10 seconds after I woke up though, and I remember the brightness of the flash lingering. This happened when I was 11. I still remember it like it was yesterday. My grandfather was getting old and had been in and out of the hospital a few times that year. At that moment he had been in the hospital for probably 2 days. We had gone into the hospital to visit him where I gave him a big hug and told him I loved him and would see him tomorrow. That night, I went to bed, and had the most beautiful dream. My grandpa came into my room and sat in the rocking chair in the corner. He invited me into his lap and told me he was going away for a while and that someday he would see me again. I shouldn't worry, because everything was okay and he wasn't in any pain. I smiled at him and gave him a big hug and told him I understood. I then looked over at my brother sleeping in the bunk below me and asked my grandpa if we should wake him up and tell him. When I turned back around to get a response from my grandpa, he was gone. I ran to the window to look out onto the front yard. There he was waving at me. He whispered, "Go tell your mom and dad exactly what I told you." I looked back at the door to my room and then back at the front yard and he was gone. I immediately woke up, ran to my parents' room and turned on the light. I told them exactly what Grandpa had told me. They told me it was just a dream and to go back to bed. I told them again exactly what Grandpa told me. Again, frustrated, it was 2 a.m. Told me to go to bed and we would talk about it in the morning. Just then the phone rang. It was the hospital. My mother started sobbing. Grandpa had passed. At that moment she just sat there with my father staring at me. I still remember their faces. They both looked at each other, then me, then each other, and finally smiled and stopped crying. They gave me a big hug and told me they loved and to go back to bed. They ended up going to the hospital that night and my aunt came over to watch us, but we have never talked about that night since. In fact, I don't think I have ever written about it, which explains the tears rolling down my cheeks right now. Wow. That was liberating, and I am glad other people have had these types of things happen. Back when I was in 5th grade, I remember sitting in class about to take an exam. It was one of those where the teacher would write down the question and we would all write the answer on our sheet. After about the 3rd question, I started to realize that I had already seen these questions, in the same order, and knew the answers. I honestly remember it being like Groundhog's Day, where I had this déjà vu moment like I had already sat through the test the previous day. I raised my hand and said we had already done these questions, and I got this dumbfounded look from the teacher and classmates. I looked around like seriously I'm the only one realizing this. Oh really? Our teacher says, "What's the next answer?" I went up and wrote the next several answers that just came to my head. He looked down at his test, verified the board, then cancelled the test. Spent the rest of the afternoon with the teacher and principal being accused of compromising the test. The principal had him go through all his notes and lesson plans to see if he had briefed the test by accident in the past. They asked the other kids. Nobody else remembered. They all scored shitty on the test. I somehow got a glimpse of the future, or my classmates fucked me by pretending they never saw the test being briefed.